My name is Brielle. I am 34 years old, and I used to believe that love meant fighting for your marriage no matter what. Right now, I'm sitting in my lawyer's office signing the final divorce papers and looking back at the journey that brought me here. 6 months ago, my husband looked me straight in the eyes and told me his affair was my fault. That single sentence didn't just end our marriage, it ended the version of myself that I thought I had to be. Before I share this story with you, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if this resonates with you. Trust me, if you've ever questioned your worth in a relationship, this journey might change how you see everything. Let me take you back to where it all began. James and I met during our sophomore year at Georgia State University. I was studying early childhood education and he was pursuing computer engineering. We were that couple everyone envied, the ones who seemed to have it all figured out. After dating for 2 years, he proposed on a rainy Thursday evening in our tiny apartment, getting down on one knee right next to our secondhand couch. I said yes, without hesitation. We married in 2016 in a small ceremony in my hometown of Marietta. Nothing fancy, just our families and closest friends gathered in the local community center. James looked so handsome in his navy suit, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive in my grandmother's vintage wedding dress. We honeymooned in Savannah, walking hand in hand through the historic district, dreaming about our future together. Our first few years were everything I'd imagined marriage would be. We bought a modest 3-bedroom house in Decatur, about 20 minutes outside Atlanta. I loved decorating each room, painting the walls soft colors, and hanging up photos of our adventures together. James was working his way up at a tech startup, often bringing home stories about his coworkers and the projects he was developing. I taught kindergarten at Sunshine Elementary, coming home each day with finger paint under my nails and stories about my students that would make James laugh. When Emma was born in March of 2018, our world became complete. She was this perfect little human with James's dark hair and my green eyes. I took a year off work to be with her, and those early months were a beautiful blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. James was an attentive father, at first getting up for midnight feedings and changing diapers without complaint. We'd take walks around the neighborhood with Emma in her stroller, pointing out flowers and dogs to her curious little face. But somewhere around Emma's first birthday, things began to shift. James started working longer hours, claiming his company was expanding, and he needed to prove himself for a promotion. He'd leave before Emma woke up and return after she was asleep. Weekend projects around the house became weekend work sessions on his laptop. Our conversations shifted from dreams and daily adventures to logistics and schedules. I noticed he was always on his phone, even during dinner. When I'd ask who he was texting, he'd say it was work-related, something about a client or a deadline. The man who used to put his phone in a drawer during our date nights was now scrolling through messages, while I tried to tell him about Emma's first words or a funny thing that happened at the grocery store. I started questioning myself. Had I become boring after becoming a mother? Was I not the same woman he'd fallen in love with? I looked in the mirror and saw stretch marks and exhaustion where I used to see confidence and vitality, so I tried harder. I bought new clothes that flattered my post-baby body. I started wearing makeup again, even just to run errands. I cooked his favorite meals and suggested date nights, but he always seemed too tired or too busy. The intimacy between us dwindled to almost nothing. When I tried to initiate physical closeness, James would say he was stressed about work or that Emma might wake up. I felt like I was living with a roommate who happened to share my last name. The loneliness was suffocating, especially because I was supposed to be happy. I had everything I'd wanted: a husband, a child, a home, so why did I feel so empty? The night that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in February. James had come home around 8:30, grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, and headed straight for his laptop. I was folding laundry on the couch, occasionally glancing at him, typing furiously at the kitchen table. Emma was already asleep, and the house felt heavy with unspoken tension. James got up to take a shower, leaving his phone face down next to his laptop. I wasn't someone who snooped. I'd never felt the need to check his messages or social media. But something made me look up when his phone buzzed with a text notification. The screen lit up just enough for me to see the sender's name, Sarah from marketing, and a preview of the message that made my blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. Last week was amazing." My hands started shaking so violently that I dropped the towel I was folding. This couldn't be what it looked like. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Sarah was talking about a work presentation or a team-building event. But deep down I knew All those late nights, the distance, the way he'd started showering immediately when he came home, it all suddenly made horrible sense. When James came out of the bathroom, his hair still damp, I was holding his phone. He saw my face and immediately knew that I'd seen something. For a moment, we just stared at each other across our living room, the space between us feeling like an ocean. "Who is Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He ran his hand through his wet hair and sat down heavily in his recliner. "Brielle, it's not what you think. Sarah works in our marketing department. We've been collaborating on some campaigns." "Collaborating?" I held up the phone, showing him the message. "This doesn't sound like work collaboration to me." His face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "You went through my phone. You violated my privacy because of your own insecurities." The word insecurities hit me like a slap. "My insecurities, James. This message is talking about last week being amazing. What happened last week that was so amazing with Sarah from marketing." He stood up and started pacing, his voice getting louder. "This is exactly why I've been distant, Brielle. You don't trust me. You're being paranoid and accusatory. Sarah and I are working on a major campaign launch. We had dinner last week to discuss strategy. That's what she's referring to." I wanted to believe him. Part of me desperately wanted to accept his explanation and pretend that everything was fine, but the message felt too personal, too intimate for a work dinner discussion. "Show me your other messages with her," I said quietly. "Absolutely not. I'm not going to feed into your paranoia by letting you read through my private work conversations. This is my phone, and you have no right to go through it." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while James slept peacefully beside me. Had I overreacted? Was I reading too much into an innocent message? But every time I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, I remembered the way he'd deflected instead of reassuring me, the way he'd made me feel like I was the problem for being concerned. Over the next few weeks, I found myself paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. James would take phone calls in the garage or outside while walking around our yard. He'd changed the passcode on his phone. He started going to the gym 3 times a week, something he'd never done before in our 8 years together. When I mentioned that he seemed to be taking better care of himself, he said it was because his company was promoting wellness initiatives. I checked our credit card statements online and found charges at restaurants I'd never heard of, all on nights when he said he was working late at the office. There was a charge at a hotel bar downtown and another at a wine shop in Buckhead. When I asked him about the restaurant charges, he said they were client dinners that would be reimbursed by his company. The gaslighting was so subtle that I almost didn't recognize it. Every time I brought up my concerns, James would turn it around on me. I was being needy. I was suffocating him. I was letting motherhood make me paranoid and possessive. He'd remind me of how hard he was working to provide for our family, how stressed he was about his career, how I should be supporting him instead of questioning him. I started to believe that maybe I was losing my mind. By April, I couldn't ignore my instincts anymore. The woman who had taught me to always trust my gut was my grandmother, and she used to say that our intuition is God's way of protecting us. I made the hardest decision of my life and contacted a private investigator. Detective Rodriguez met me at a coffee shop in Virginia Highland on a rainy Thursday morning. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who specialized in marital investigations. She didn't judge me or make me feel foolish for needing proof of what I already knew in my heart. "Honey," she said gently, 90% of the wives who walk into my office already know the truth. You're not here because you're paranoid. You're here because you need evidence to validate what you're feeling." I hired her that day, giving her photos of James, his work schedule, and the little information I had about Sarah. The retainer fee was $800 that I took from our emergency savings account money I told myself I was borrowing and would somehow pay back. For 2 weeks, I lived in a strange state of suspended reality. I continued our daily routine, making breakfast for Emma, taking her to daycare, going to work, picking her up, making dinner for James. But inside, I felt like I was watching someone else's life, waiting for the phone call that would either set me free or destroy me. Detective Rodriguez called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was helping Emma with a puzzle. Her voice was gentle but direct. "Brielle, I have the information you requested. Would you like to meet this evening to discuss what I found?" That night, I sat across from Detective Rodriguez in her small office staring at a manila envelope that contained the evidence of my husband's betrayal. The photos were worse than I had imagined. James and Sarah walking hand in hand down Peachtree Street. James kissing Sarah outside a restaurant in Midtown. James and Sarah entering the Hampton Inn on a Thursday afternoon. The same Thursday, he'd told me he had a late client meeting. Sarah Peterson was 28 years old, single, and had been working at James's company for 6 months. She had long blonde hair and a bright smile that I recognized from her LinkedIn profile, which Detective Rodriguez had included in the report. She looked nothing like me. Where I was auburn-haired and curvy from pregnancy, she was tall and lean with the kind of effortless beauty that comes from being young and unencumbered by the responsibilities of motherhood. The affair had been going on for 3 months. They met for lunch twice a week and spent Thursday evenings together at various hotels around Atlanta. James had told her that his marriage was essentially over, that we were only staying together for Emma's sake, and that he was planning to file for divorce once he figured out the custody arrangements. Sitting in that office looking at photographic evidence of my husband's double life, I felt something break inside me that I knew would never heal. It wasn't just the betrayal, though, that was devastating enough. It was the realization that while I'd been questioning my own sanity, blaming myself for our problems, and working harder to save our marriage, James had been building a completely separate life with another woman. I drove home that night with the envelope on my passenger seat, feeling like I was carrying a bomb that would explode my entire world. Emma was already asleep when I got there, and James was watching television in our living room, looking so normal and relaxed that I almost couldn't believe he was the same man from the photographs. "How was book club?" he asked without looking away from the screen. I had told him I was going to my monthly book club meeting, another lie to add to the collection we'd both been building. "It was fine," I said, walking past him toward our bedroom. "I'm tired. I think I'll go to sleep early." That night I lay in bed next to my husband, knowing that our marriage was already over, but that the hardest part was still to come. I had to decide how to confront him, when to tell Emma, and how to rebuild a life I'd never imagined I'd have to create on my own. I spent 3 sleepless days planning exactly what I would say to James. I practiced the conversation in my car in the shower while folding laundry. I imagined different scenarios, his possible reactions, and how I would respond to his inevitable attempts to minimize or justify what he'd done. Friday night, after Emma had gone to sleep, I asked James to sit down in our living room. He must have sensed something serious in my tone, because he muted the television and gave me his full attention for the first time in months. "James," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "I know about Sarah." I watched his face change color, draining from his cheeks, as he processed my words. For a moment he looked like he might deny it, but then he saw the envelope in my hands, and something shifted in his expression. "What do you think you know?" he asked carefully. I opened the envelope and spread the photographs across our coffee table like playing cards. James and Sarah holding hands. James and Sarah kissing. James and Sarah entering a hotel together. The evidence was undeniable and heartbreaking. James stared at the photos for a long moment before looking up at me. Instead of the shame or remorse I expected to see, his face showed something that looked almost like relief, as if he was tired of pretending. "Yes," he said simply. "I've been seeing Sarah." I had prepared myself for denial, for gaslighting, for him to try to convince me that the photos were taken out of context. But his immediate admission left me momentarily speechless. "For how long?" I managed to ask. 3 months. "Why?" And this is when James said the words that would change everything between us forever. "Look at yourself, Brielle," he said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "You've completely let yourself go since Emma was born. All you care about is being a mom. You've forgotten how to be a wife. When's the last time you made an effort for me? When's the last time you tried to be attractive or interesting?" Each word felt like a physical blow. I stared at this man I'd loved for 8 years, this man who was the father of my child, and barely recognized him. "Sarah makes me feel alive again," he continued. "She's passionate and exciting. She cares about her appearance. She asks me about my work and actually listens to my answers. She makes me remember who I am outside of this house and these responsibilities." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "So this is my fault. If you had been a better wife, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. This affair is as much your fault as it is mine." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on our mantelpiece. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman who had been apologizing for taking up too much space, for not being enough, for somehow driving her husband into another woman's arms, simply ceased to exist. "You're right," I said quietly. And James looked surprised, as if he'd expected me to argue or beg. "I'm right about what, You're right that this affair is partially my fault. My fault for accepting less than I deserve. My fault for making excuses for your behavior. My fault for believing that love meant tolerating disrespect." James frowned, clearly confused by my response. "But let me be very clear about something," I continued, standing up from our couch. "Your decision to cheat on me, to lie to me, to make me question my own sanity for months, that's entirely on you. I may have gained weight after having your child. I may have been tired from taking care of our daughter while you worked late with your girlfriend. But nothing I did or didn't do gave you the right to betray our marriage and our family." James stood up too, his voice getting louder. "I'm willing to work this out, Brielle. I'll end things with Sarah. We can go to counseling. But you need to change too. You need to start taking care of yourself again, and remembering that you're my wife, not just Emma's mother." I looked at this man who wanted me to compete for his attention, who thought I should be grateful for his willingness to stop cheating on me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt powerful. "No," I said simply. "No what? No, I won't work this out. No, I won't go to counseling with you. No, I won't change myself to become someone you might decide not to cheat on again." James stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're not thinking clearly. You're emotional. Let's talk about this tomorrow when you've calmed down." "I've never been thinking more clearly in my life," I said, picking up the photographs from the coffee table. "I want a divorce." That night after James stormed out of the house, I called my sister Katie. She lived in Nashville and had gone through her own divorce 3 years earlier. When she answered the phone, I could hear music and laughter in the background. "Brielle, what's wrong? You never call this late." I broke down and told her everything: the affair, the gaslighting, the photographs, the conversation we'd just had. Katie listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I'm so proud of you," she finally said. "Proud of me?" "My marriage just fell apart. My daughter's father is cheating on me. How can you be proud? Because you stood up for yourself. Because you recognized your worth. Do you remember what you told me when David and I were having problems? You said I deserved someone who would choose me every single day, not someone who made me feel like I had to earn their love." I had forgotten that conversation, but Katie's words brought it back. 3 years ago, when her husband David had been emotionally abusive and controlling, I'd encouraged her to leave. I'd told her she deserved better. But somehow I'd lost sight of that wisdom when it came to my own life. "The hardest part is over," Katie continued. "You've acknowledged the truth and made a decision. Everything from here is just logistics." Over the next few days, Katie helped me find a divorce attorney and research daycare options for Emma. She offered to let us stay with her in Nashville while I figured things out, but I knew I needed to rebuild my life here in Atlanta, where Emma's school and friends were, where my job was waiting for me. The conversation with Emma was the hardest one I'd ever had. I sat her down on her small bed, surrounded by her stuffed animals and picture books, and tried to explain that Daddy and I were going to live in different houses. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her 6-year-old mind trying to make sense of adult problems. "Oh, sweetheart, no, this has nothing to do with you. Sometimes grown-ups realize they're not happy living together anymore, but we both love you so much. That will never change." "Will Daddy still love me?" The question broke my heart because I knew that James did love Emma, even if he'd forgotten how to love me. "Yes, baby, Daddy will always love you. You'll still see him all the time." Emma seemed to accept this explanation with the resilience that children often have. She asked if she could decorate her new room and whether she could bring her favorite stuffed rabbit with her. Her ability to adapt gave me strength for the difficult weeks ahead. James tried several times to convince me to reconsider. He sent flowers to my classroom with a note that said, "Let's start over." He showed up at Emma's daycare pickup one afternoon, asking if we could talk. He even called Katie, asking her to convince me that I was making a mistake. But I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I had seen who James really was when his true character was revealed, and I couldn't unsee it. The man who blamed me for his affair, who made me feel like I had to earn basic respect and fidelity, was not someone I could build a future with. Moving into our new apartment felt like stepping into a completely different life. It was a small 2-bedroom place in Decatur, not far from Emma's school. The walls were white and bare, and our furniture looked sparse in the larger space, but there was something peaceful about the emptiness. It felt like possibility. Emma loved having her own room. We painted it pale yellow with white trim, and she helped me hang up her artwork and arrange her books on the new shelves I'd assembled. She declared it the best room ever and asked if we could have pancakes for dinner to celebrate our new home. Going back to work full-time was an adjustment, but my colleagues at Sunshine Elementary were incredibly supportive. My principal, Mrs. Chen, had gone through a divorce herself and understood the challenges of single motherhood. She worked with me on my schedule and recommended an excellent after-school program for Emma. The financial adjustment was the hardest part. Even with child support, money was tight in a way it had never been during my marriage. I had to budget carefully for groceries and put off buying new clothes for myself. But there was something empowering about managing my own finances, about knowing exactly where every dollar was going and making decisions based on what Emma and I actually needed. Some evenings after Emma was asleep, the loneliness would hit me like a wave. I'd look around our quiet apartment and wonder if I'd made the right choice. Dating seemed impossible with my new responsibilities, and I couldn't imagine trusting someone enough to let them into our carefully constructed new life. But then Emma would wake up in the morning with a smile, excited to tell me about her dreams or show me a drawing she'd made. She seemed happier and more relaxed than she'd been in months. Children sense tension even when adults think they're hiding it well, and Emma was thriving in our peaceful, drama-free environment. I started seeing Dr. Martinez, a therapist, who specialized in helping women recover from emotional abuse and gaslighting. Through our sessions, I began to understand how gradually I'd lost myself in my marriage, how I'd internalized James's criticism, and started believing that I was somehow responsible for his choices. "You spent years walking on eggshells," Dr. Martinez explained during one session. "You modified your behavior, your appearance, your needs, trying to prevent him from being unhappy. But happiness is an inside job. You can't love someone into being a good partner." I joined a support group for single mothers that met every Tuesday evening at a community center in Virginia Highland. Listening to other women's stories helped me realize that I wasn't alone in my experience. There was Maria, whose ex-husband had drained their joint accounts before leaving. There was Jennifer, whose ex had used their children as weapons in their custody battle. There was Amanda, whose husband had been cheating for years before she found out. But what struck me most about these women was their strength and resilience. They were all rebuilding their lives with grace and determination. They were raising amazing children, pursuing new careers, and discovering parts of themselves they'd forgotten existed. I started taking a painting class on Saturday mornings while Emma was with James. It was something I'd loved in college, but had abandoned when life got busy. Standing in front of a canvas with a brush in my hand, I felt connected to a part of myself I'd thought was gone forever. My instructor, an elderly woman named Ruth, encouraged me to paint my emotions, to use color and texture to process what words couldn't express. The first painting I completed was a storm clearing over a mountain landscape. Dark, angry clouds giving way to bright sunshine, illuminating green valleys below. When I showed it to Emma, she said, "Mommy, that looks like how I feel inside now, like the sad clouds went away." 6 months after that night, when I confronted James with the photographs, I found myself sitting in my lawyer's office signing the final divorce papers. The woman who had discovered her husband's affair and blamed herself for not being enough had been replaced by someone I barely recognized and completely admired. The divorce settlement was fair. James kept the house, but took on the mortgage payments. I received half of our savings and investments plus monthly child support. Emma would spend every other weekend with James and alternate holidays. He had continued his relationship with Sarah, and I'd heard through mutual friends that they were having problems, arguing frequently, and struggling with the reality that relationships built on deception rarely have solid foundations. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, just a quiet gratitude that I was no longer part of that drama. James and I maintained a cordial relationship for Emma's sake, communicating through text messages about school events and medical appointments. The man who had once been my best friend was now simply Emma's father, and I was okay with that distance. Emma was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. She loved having 2 homes and 2 sets of toys. She enjoyed the special attention she got during her weekends with James, and she appreciated the calm consistency of our weekday routine. Her teacher mentioned that Emma seemed more confident and outgoing than she'd been earlier in the year. "Mommy," Emma said one evening while we were making dinner together, "you smile a lot more now." Her observation stopped me in my tracks. I realized she was right. Despite the financial stress and the occasional loneliness, I was genuinely happier than I'd been in years. I was no longer pretending to be someone I wasn't, no longer walking on eggshells, no longer questioning my own perceptions and instincts. I had started to consider dating again, though I wasn't in any rush. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand the importance of being whole on my own before inviting someone else into my life. I knew that when I was ready to love someone again, it would be from a place of choice, not need. I would never again settle for someone who made me feel like I had to earn their respect or compete for their attention. The painting class had evolved into a small business. Ruth had encouraged me to sell some of my work at local art fairs, and I'd been surprised by the positive response. People connected with the emotional honesty in my paintings, and several had commissioned custom pieces. The extra income was helping with our budget, and more importantly, it was giving me a sense of purpose and creativity that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. My relationship with Katie had grown stronger through this experience. She visited us monthly, and Emma adored her aunt who brought presents and told funny stories about her own dating adventures in Nashville. Katie often reminded me how proud she was of the way I'd handled everything, how I'd chosen self-respect over settling for less than I deserved. Looking back, I could see how the affair had actually been a gift, though it took months for me to understand it that way. It had forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding to recognize, patterns of behavior I'd been accepting, and to discover strength I didn't know I possessed. My marriage had ended, but my real life had finally begun. As I signed my name on the last page of the divorce decree, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, desperately trying to save a marriage to a man who blamed her for his betrayal. That woman felt like a stranger to me now. She had been so afraid of being alone that she'd forgotten how to be herself. The woman I'd become was someone I genuinely liked and respected. I was raising an amazing daughter, building a small art business, maintaining meaningful friendships, and creating a life filled with peace and possibility. I had learned that love without respect isn't love at all, and that my value as a person was never determined by whether someone chose to betray me or cherish me. I drove home to our little apartment where Emma was waiting with a drawing she'd made of our family. 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. "This is us," she said proudly, "and we're happy." Standing in our kitchen, looking at my daughter's artwork, I realized she was absolutely right. We were happy. Not perfect, not without challenges, but genuinely, authentically happy in a way that felt sustainable and real. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. My marriage ended, but my real life finally began. And for the first time in years, I was excited to see what came next. Have you ever found yourself in a relationship where you were constantly questioning your own worth? Have you experienced gaslighting that made you doubt your own perceptions? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please give this video a like if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real stories about overcoming life's challenges. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better than settling for less. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your worth is not negotiable. You deserve love that builds you up, not breaks you down.